The body came in cold, not dead cold, not the cold of space, but the cold of a man who had been running for a very long time and had finally stopped. The shuttle docked at Helix 9 at 0300 station time. 2 Sorvathy nurses and a loading drone pulled the human out on a flat carry board. His name was on a small metal tag clipped to his jacket: Sergeant Daren Cole, Earth Military Division 7. He had no other identification, nothing else. They found a broken knife in his boot and 3 empty containers that once held something humans called ration bars. That was everything. The station was quiet at that hour. Most of the medical staff were sleeping or doing low work tasks. The night crew was small: 4 nurses, 1 junior doctor, an old cleaning machine that moved slowly down the far hall and made a soft humming sound. Our Vesikin was not supposed to be there that night. She had stayed late to finish a report on a Drellian patient who had recovered from nerve damage. She was almost done. She was thinking about sleep. She was thinking about the warm pod in her quarters and the silence she loved at night. Then the carryboard came through the door and everything changed. She looked at the human, the way any good doctor looks at a new patient. Quickly but carefully she checked his breathing. Shallow but steady. She checked his color. His skin was a medium brown. She had read that humans came in many shades. She had never seen one in person before. He looked smaller than she expected from the reports and the history files. She had always imagined humans as something larger, louder. This one was just a man, quiet, lying still, eyes closed. She told the nurses to put him on table 7. The room was clean and white. The lights were low and soft. The scanner above table 7 was the best one on the station. It could read bone density, fluid levels, organ function, nerve activity, and about 200 other things in less than 30 seconds. Dr. Vesikin had used it 10,000 times. She trusted it completely. She activated it and passed the long arm of the scanner slowly over the human's body. The numbers came up normal mostly. A few things she did not recognize, but that was expected. Humans were new. Humans were different. She made notes. She was calm. She was professional. She told herself this was just like any other patient. Then she reached his left hand. The scanner slowed, not because she told it to. It slowed on its own. The screen filled with lines and numbers she had never seen before. The machine made a soft clicking sound, like it was confused, like it was trying again and again to understand what it was reading. She leaned forward and looked at the screen more closely, and then something moved, not the hand itself. The hand stayed still, completely still, but under the skin something shifted. Something long and thin moved slowly beneath the surface, like a rope being pulled through water. It was not a nerve jumping, it was not a blood vessel, it was something else, something that moved with purpose, something that seemed almost aware. Dr. Vesikin stepped back. Her 4 hands came up to her chest, the way Sorvathy hands do when they are afraid. It was not something she chose to do. Her body did it on its own. She stared at the human's hand. The hand was still again. The skin was smooth. The fingers were relaxed. Nothing to see now, nothing at all. She told herself she had imagined it. She moved the scanner arm back over the hand. It happened again. This time 2 of her nurses saw it too. The younger one made a sound and moved toward the door. The older one stood still, but her face had gone the pale gray color that meant she was frightened. Dr. Vesikin raised one hand and told them both to be quiet. Was the doctor. She was in charge. She was not going to panic in her own medical bay, but her hands were shaking. She looked at the human's face. He was still unconscious. His chest rose and fell slowly. His expression was peaceful, like a man having a quiet dream. She looked back at the hand. The scanner was still running. Its screen was now showing numbers that kept changing, kept climbing, kept doing things numbers were not supposed to do. She called the station security office. It took 4 minutes for 2 guards to arrive. They were Helix staff, both Drellian, both large, both carrying the standard issue containment tools that were almost never used on this station. She told them to stand outside the door. She did not tell them why not yet. She needed to think. She ran the scan a 3rd time. This time she went slowly, very slowly. She moved the scanner arm centimeter by centimeter across the palm of the hand, across the fingers, across the wrist. She watched the screen and she watched the hand. At the same time, the readings were extraordinary. The bone structure was normal enough, but wrapped around those bones was a network of tissue she had no name for, dense, layered, packed together like armor under skin. The tendons were thicker. than any species she had treated, wrapped in what looked like layers of old damage that had healed over and over and over again, building on itself, each time stronger than before, and at the center of it all, something that the scanner kept returning to, something it could not classify, something that sat just below the surface of the palm and moved every time the scanner light passed over it, like it was watching the light, like it was responding to being seen. Dr. Vesekin pressed the station-wide alert button. It was a low alert, not the emergency sound, just the quiet signal that brought senior staff to attention in the middle of the night. She did not take her eyes off the human while she pressed it. Within 10 minutes there were 7 people in the room, and no one was speaking. They all stood in a half circle around table 7, and they all looked at the scanner screen, and they all looked at the hand, and no one had any explanation, and no one wanted to be the first to say what they were all thinking. The human was still asleep, his face was still peaceful, and his left hand lay flat on the table, fingers slightly curled in the natural resting position of a sleeping man, completely ordinary, except that something inside it was moving slowly, quietly, like something that had been waiting for a very long time and was not in any hurry. And in the far corner of the room, the old cleaning machine moved along the wall, making its soft humming sound, knowing nothing about what was happening and caring even less. Dr. Vesekin looked at the human's face one more time, then she looked at her own hands, then she pressed the lockdown button for Medical Bay 3. The doors sealed with a sound like a held breath, and Sergeant Daren Cole slept on. The call to the Earth consulate took 11 minutes to connect. 11 minutes of Dr. Vesekin standing in the side office with the door closed and her 4 hands folded in front of her, trying very hard to keep her voice steady and her thoughts in order. Outside the office, her staff were still standing around table 7, still looking at the scanner screen, still not talking to each other. The human was still asleep. The thing in his hand was still moving when the screen finally connected. The face that appeared was calm and brown-skinned and young-looking, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that had the specific kind of patience that comes from years of dealing with people who are upset. Her name was Liaison Officer Priya Mehta, Earth Diplomatic Consulate, Outer Sectors. She introduced herself in 3 galactic languages before switching to Unified Common. She said she was sorry for the delay in connection. She said she was happy to help. Dr. Vesekin told her everything. She described the patient. She described the scanner readings. She described the movement under the skin. She used careful clinical language. She tried to sound like a doctor presenting a case and not like someone who had been frightened out of her training by a sleeping man on a table. When she finished, there was silence on the other end. Then Liaison Mehta said something that Dr. Vesekin would think about for the rest of her career. She said, "Oh, he is military. You say his name is Cole. Did you check his other hand too?" Dr. Vesekin went cold. She had not checked the other hand. She had not even thought about the other hand. She excused herself, walked back into the medical bay, picked up the scanner arm, and passed it over the right hand of Sergeant Daren Cole. The screen filled with the same impossible numbers, the same dense layered tissue, the same thing moving slowly under the skin, like a living cable, like something with its own quiet purpose. She went back to the office. She looked at the screen, at Liaison Mehta's calm face, both hands. She said. Mehta nodded slowly, as if this was information she had expected. "I need to explain some things," she said. "Please understand that none of this is classified. There is no secret here. It is simply that no one in the consortium ever asked us directly, and we never thought to include it in the standard biological briefing packet." "What is it?" Dr. Vesekin asked. "What is inside his hands?" Mehta looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "His body." Dr. Vesekin did not understand. Mehta tried again. She said that what the scanner was reading was not a foreign object, not an implant, not a parasite, not a disease. What it was reading was the result of years and years of a human body doing what human bodies do. When they are pushed hard and pushed often, they change. She said they rebuild themselves. They make themselves harder and stronger and better at the thing they are being asked to do. And military humans, she said, are pushed very hard from a very young age. So the tissue, asked Vesekin. "The moving tissue is tendon," Mehta said, "and scar structure, and something your scanner probably does not have a category for because your medical database was not built with humans in mind. It is natural. It grew there. It is part of him." Dr. Vesekin sat down, her second and third arms folded against her middle, the way they did when she was overwhelmed. She looked at the wall for a moment, then looked back at the screen. The station security chief, a tall, gray Helix official named Commander Brath, had come into the office without knocking. He stood behind Vesikin with his arms crossed and his expression flat. He had seen the scanner readings. He had decided there was something dangerous on his station, and he had already begun drafting the ejection order in his head. He spoke over Vesikin's shoulder. He said the human was a contamination risk. He said the station could not verify what was living inside the patient. He said that under Helix 9 safety regulations he had every right to put the human back on a shuttle and send him somewhere else. Meta looked at Brather. Expression did not change. She said, "I strongly advise against that," Commander Brath said. "The health of this station is my responsibility." Meta said, "Of course, and I respect that, but I want to make sure you have complete information before you make a decision, because a decision made without complete information about a human soldier could have outcomes that are difficult to walk back there." Was something in the way she said it not a threat? Meta did not raise her voice. She did not narrow her eyes. There was no sharpness in her words at all. But the words sat in the air of that small office, and Commander Brath heard them very clearly. He did not say anything else. Meta told them that Cole should be allowed to wake up naturally, that he should be given water and whatever food could be made available, that he should be treated like a patient who had done nothing wrong, because that was what he was. "Is he dangerous?" Vesikin asked. Meta paused. The pause was very short, maybe half a second, but Vesikin noticed it. "Oh, you," Meta said. "Only if you threaten him." Then she said she would remain available for any further questions wished. Them a good station morning and closed the connection. The screen went dark. Commander Brath left the office without speaking. Dr. Vesikin sat alone for a moment, looking at nothing. Then she heard something from the medical bay, a small sound, a movement. She stood up and walked back through the door and stopped. Sergeant Daren Cole was awake. He was not sitting up dramatically. He was not confused or thrashing or afraid. He was simply lying on the table, looking at the ceiling with the calm expression of a man who wakes up slowly and does not rush the process. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the white walls, the lights, the ring of alien faces staring at him from a careful distance. He looked at the scanner arm still hovering over his hand. He looked at his hand. He looked back at the ceiling. Then he turned his head slightly and looked at Dr. Vesikin with dark, tired eyes. "Can I get some water?" he said. His voice was low and rough from sleep, but steady, very steady, and in that moment Dr. Vesikin understood something that the records and the briefing files and the diplomatic calls had not quite managed to prepare her for. He already knew what they had found. He had probably known the moment he saw the scanner, and he was not worried about it, not even slightly. Asterisk. They gave him water. One of the nurses brought a standard patient cup filled from the station supply and held it out at arm's length, the way someone holds something out to an animal. They are not sure about Cole. Took it with his left hand, the hand with the impossible readings, and drank half of it in one go. He handed it back. He said, "Thank you." The nurse took the cup and stepped back quickly, and Cole noticed and said nothing about it. Dr. Vesikin pulled a chair close to table 7 and sat down. She had her medical pad in 2 of her hands and her scanner in a third, and she held the 4th hand flat on her knee to stop it from shaking. She looked at Cole, and Cole looked at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. She asked him if he was in pain. He thought about it, the way people think about questions they find slightly odd. He moved his shoulders and his neck and pressed 2 fingers against the side of his ribs where the original injury had been, and then he said, "Not really." A little stiff. She told him that he had come in with 3 broken ribs, a deep cut on his left forearm, and something she could only describe as a large amount of old damage spread across almost every part of his body. She told him she had patched the ribs with standard bone-set foam and sealed the cut. She told him she expected him to be in significant pain. He said he had been through worse. She believed him. She asked if she could run the scanner again, this time with his knowledge. This time slowly. He said yes. He held out his left hand, palm up, fingers relaxed, and waited. She passed the scanner over it. The readings came up the same. Dense layered tissue packed around every bone, tendon structures that overlapped and interlocked in ways. Her anatomy files had no diagram for old scar tissue built into new scar tissue built into older scar tissue, like rings inside a tree, like years written in the body, and at the center of the palm, that thing, that slow, quiet movement that had frightened her staff in the middle of the night. She asked him what it was. He looked at his own hand for a moment like he was trying to find the right words. He said, "My tendons move when they're under load. Even low load like scanner light, they kind of wake up in a shift. They've been doing it since about my 5th year of training. I don't feel it anymore. I forget other people can't see it." She asked him what kind of training. He said, "Military standard plus some extra things I chose on my own." She asked, "How long?" He said, "Since I was 19, maybe a bit before." She looked at her pad. She pulled up the comparative biology file for Sorvathy physical adaptation. The entry said that meaningful structural biological adaptation in Sorvathy required consistent environmental pressure over a minimum of 3 generations, approximately 240 years with pharmaceutical support. It could be reduced to 160. She looked up from the pad. "You are how old?" she asked. "At 31, he said. She stared at him. She was not trying to be rude. She simply could not immediately form a professional response to what she had just heard. He seemed to understand. He almost smiled, but did not quite. She asked if she could look at his forearm. He pushed the sleeve up without being asked. The inside of his forearm was a map. The cut she had sealed was near the wrist. New work. Her work below that and above that and all the way up to the elbow was a geography of old damage, old cuts, healed burns, a long flat scar that ran from below the elbow almost to the shoulder. She had seen this kind of scarring on patients who had suffered accidents or fires or attacks. She asked him what happened there. He said, "That one is from a piece of metal in a wall. I was pushed through the wall. The metal caught me." He paused. "That was about 3 years ago." She looked at the scar. It was fully healed, smooth, strong. Tissue had grown over it and under it and around it and knitted it back into the whole of the arm like it had always been part of him. She asked him whether he had received medical treatment after that injury. He thought about it again with that same slightly odd expression. He said, "We were in a combat zone. We had a field kit I wrapped." As she stopped writing on her pad, she just stopped. She set the pad down on the edge of the table and looked at the arm and then at the hand and then at his face, and she said very quietly, "Your body did this on its own?" He looked at the scar. "The way people look at something so familiar it has stopped meaning anything." He said, "Yeah, that's what bodies do." She picked her pad back up. She made herself write. She was a doctor, and doctors write things down even when the things they are writing feel impossible. That is the job, that is the training. She asked him about the hands again. She asked why the tissue was so dense, why it had built up like that. He explained it the way someone explains something they learned so long ago it has become simple. He said the hands take more damage than almost any other part of the body in close combat, and the body learns, he said, every time the tissue breaks down. The body repairs it a little stronger, a little thicker. He said it takes years and it hurts in the early years, but after a while the hands stop being damaged. The same way they become something else. She asked him what they become. He looked at them. He turned them over once, looked at the palms. Looked at the backs, he said. Tool, the word sat in the air. She thought about her own hands, her 4 elegant, long-fingered Sorvathy hands that had been designed over generations of careful evolution for precision, for delicate work, for healing. She thought about what it meant for a species to look at its own body and choose to turn it into something harder. She asked him one more question. She said, "Did this hurt when you were young? When you were doing this to yourself, did you know what you were making yourself into?" He was quiet for a longer moment than the others. Then he said, "I knew what I needed to be. I needed to be someone who came home. And that turned out to require certain things." She wrote that down too. She wrote it word for word, and then she sat back in her chair and looked at this man, this quiet, ordinary-seeming man lying on table 7, who had walked into his own pain year after year and let his body swallow it and grow stronger on it. And she thought about Category 2, primitive biological low threat, and she almost laughed. But she did not laugh because it was not funny. It was something much larger than funny. She said it out loud, almost to herself, not meaning to say it as loudly as she did. She said, "You are not underdeveloped, you are just differently dangerous." Cole heard her. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Can I have some more water?" Word moved through Helix 9 the way water moves through a small space, quietly, and then everywhere. By morning, the medical bay had 8 doctors in it. By mid-morning, it had 12. By the time the station lights shifted to full afternoon cycle, there were 17 senior medical staff standing in and around medical bay. 3, and every single one of them had a scanner and a pad and an expression that sat somewhere between scientific excitement and genuine unease. Cole sat on table 7 and let them look. He had eaten, he had slept again for a few hours, he had been given a clean station shirt that was slightly too wide in the shoulders and slightly too short in the arms. He was drinking his 4th cup of water and watching the alien. Doctor's the way a man watches rain through a window. Calm, no particular feeling about it. Dr. Vesikin stood closest. She was the one running the full scan, the others gathered behind her around the main display screen where the results came up in real time and translated themselves into charts and diagrams and bright lines of data that kept doing things nobody expected. It went organ by organ, system by system. The skull came first. The station's bone specialist, a narrow-faced Drellian named Dr. Kos, ran the density scan 3 times because he did not believe the first result. The human skull was layered, the outer surface was hard. The layer beneath it was slightly softer, designed to flex slightly on impact. The layer beneath that was hard again. The combination was extraordinarily efficient at distributing force. Kos had treated species with thicker skulls, but he had never seen this particular structure. This deliberate layering, he said it quietly to the doctor beside him. It absorbs the blow and then it spreads it. It does not just resist damage, it manages it. The doctor beside him said nothing and kept staring at the screen. The heart came next too. Chambers more than the standard model for species of this size. 1 served as a primary pump, 1 served as a secondary that kicked in under stress and also had a limited ability to compensate if the primary was damaged. Not fully, not for long, but long enough. The heart specialist, whose name no one could easily pronounce, said that she had read theoretical papers about redundant cardiac function in biological organisms, but had never seen it in a living patient. She asked Cole if he knew his heart had a backup. Cole said, yes. She asked if that was common knowledge among humans. He said, it's in the school health books. She wrote something on her pad and underlined it twice. Then came the liver. What? LIVD. Inside Cole's liver was a filtering system, and then beside it, running parallel like a second road alongside a main road, was another filtering system, slightly different in structure, slightly different in the chemicals it processed. The two together could handle toxins at a rate that made the toxicology specialist visibly pale. She ran the numbers. Again she showed them to Vesikin. Vesikin looked at them and then looked at Cole. She asked, how much of this developed naturally? He said, all of it. She asked, how much of this do you use regularly? He said, depends on the assignment. No one asked a follow-up question. Then they found the femur. It was the left femur, the upper leg bone. It had been broken once, completely, a full fracture from the look of the healed site. The bone had grown back together, but not exactly as it was before. It had grown back thicker at the breakpoint, denser, more material laid down right at the point of old failure, like the body had looked at the break and decided that place would never break. Again the orthopedic specialist asked Cole when it had happened. Cole said, about 6 years ago. She asked what treatment he had received. He said, a splint, some pain management tablets. We were 3 weeks from the nearest facility. She asked if he had been mobile during those 3 weeks. He said, mostly we were moving. So I moved with the specialist set her scanner down on the nearest surface. She stood with her arms at her sides for a long moment, looking at the image of the healed bone on the display screen. She said to no one in particular, in my species. That break would require 6 months of full immobilization and 2 surgical procedures to avoid permanent functional loss. Nobody answered her because everyone in the room was busy processing their own piece of the same picture. They moved to the hands last. Everyone gathered closer for the hands. The full detailed scan played on the screen, and Vesikin walked through it step by step for the group. She showed the layered tendon architecture. She showed the scar tissue integration. She showed the dynamic movement response, the thing that had started everything the night before, the thing that moved when the scanner light passed over it. She explained what Cole had told her about training and repetition and the body learning she used. His word, tools. A young intern stood at the back of the group, a Sorvathy like Vesikin, just a few years out of her medical program. She had been quiet the whole time, just watching, just listening. She had the look of someone who is understanding something they do not quite want to understand. She said, it looks like he was built for this. Cole heard it. He was looking at his water cup at the time he looked up. He found the intern in the group. He said, "Not built shaped, there's a difference." She looked at him. He said, "Built means someone else did it. Shaped means you did it yourself. And you chose what you were shaping toward." The room was quiet. The display screen was still running, the scan still cycling through all the data, all the dense, layered, extraordinary, impossible, ordinary data of one human body, one 31-year-old man who had simply lived a hard life and let his body answer every hard thing it was given. Chief biologist of Helix 9, an old, heavy, swarthy male named Dr. Path, who had been in medicine for longer than most of the staff had been alive, stood at the back of the group with his arms folded and his eyes on the screen. He had not spoken yet. Now he spoke. He said it slowly, and he said it to the room, but he was looking at Cole. He said, "What we are looking at is one of the most resilient, self-repairing, and adaptable biological systems ever recorded on this station. And the remarkable thing is not the biology. The remarkable thing is that this species has had this capacity for a very long time and has simply been too occupied with surviving to understand how extraordinary it makes them." The room was quiet again. Cole finished his water. He held up the empty cup and looked at the nearest nurse. He said, "Any chance I can get something to eat? I've been up for a couple hours now and I'm pretty hungry." There was a pause. Then 4 doctors turned toward the food processor at the same time and began arguing in 3 different languages about what humans were supposed to eat. And for the first time in Medical Bay 3, someone laughed. It was small and surprised and quickly stopped, but it was there. The shuttle bay was cold, the way all shuttle bays are cold, and it smelled like fuel and recycled air, and the particular kind of emptiness that exists in places built for leaving. Sergeant Daren Cole stood near the docking gate with a small bag. Over one shoulder the bag held his broken knife, his empty ration containers, the clean station shirt he had been given, and a sealed medical report that Dr. Vesekin had prepared for whatever human medical facility received him next. He was wearing his own jacket, again washed and mended by one of the junior nurses who had done it without being asked and without saying anything about it. Was eating something. The food processor had made it was beige and dense and shaped like a flat square. And it tasted like almost nothing, but Cole ate it without complaint because he had eaten far worse in far harder places, and this at least was warm. Dr. Vesekin walked into the bay at the time she had told him she would. She had a data pad in 2 of her hands, and she walked the way she always walked, straight and careful, and with the specific kind of purpose that meant she was holding something in and thinking very precisely about how to let it out. She stopped a few steps away from him and looked at his bag and his jacket and the beige square of food in his hand. She asked him if the food was acceptable. He said it was fine. She said the processor did not have a category for human nutrition, and the staff had done their best. He said they did good. There was a small silence. Neither of them moved to fill it immediately. Then she said, "I have been preparing a report for the Galactic Medical Consortium. It is a formal petition to reclassify humanity in the official biological registry." He looked at her. He chewed the beige food he swallowed. He said, "We have a classification." She turned the pad and showed him the screen. He read it, Category 2. Primitive biological low threat. He read it a second time. His expression did not change dramatically. He did not laugh or get angry. He just looked at it the way someone looks at a thing that explains a lot about how they have been treated in rooms. They did not know they were being assessed, and he said, "Low threat." She said, "That is the part one most want to change." She told him that the current classification affected how human patients were treated across every consortium-affiliated facility, how much care was taken, how seriously symptoms were assessed, how prepared medical staff were to deal with human biology. She told him that doctors across 12 systems were walking into rooms with human patients and making the same assumption her staff had made when Cole's shuttle arrived. They were looking at a Category 2 species and preparing for something simple, something manageable, something that would probably be fine, and they were wrong. She said, "I do not want another human to come through any of our facilities and have a doctor miss something important because that doctor assumed." There was nothing remarkable to find. Cole had stopped eating. He was looking at the data pad but not really looking at it. He was somewhere else for a moment, the way people go somewhere else when something touches a thing they keep quiet. He said, "Has that happened? Has a human died in a consortium facility because of a wrong assessment?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, I looked at the records last night. There have been 14 humans treated across consortium facilities in the past 8 years. 4 of them had outcomes that I would now consider questionable given what I know. 3 of the 4 were classified as minor cases and released early. Cole nodded slowly, not a surprised nod, a sad one. The nod of someone hearing confirmation of something they had already suspected, he said. What will you reclassify us as? She looked at her pad. She found the entry she had written the night before. She had written it after sitting alone in her office for a long time after everyone else had left, after the bay had gone quiet, and it was just her and the scan data and the image of a healed femur and a hand full of something her database had no name. For she said, deceptively enduring, it is the highest non-hostile classification in our system. It means a species that appears fragile or unremarkable, but demonstrates extraordinary biological persistence and adaptive capacity under sustained pressure. Cole looked at her. She said, I had to write the definition myself. The category existed, but no one had ever needed to apply it to a patient before. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, deceptively enduring. He said it the way people say something they are deciding whether it fits. Then he said, that's not bad. The docking gate behind him gave a soft tone. The shuttle was ready. The connection was sealed. The light above the gate turned from yellow to green. He picked up his bag. He finished the last of the beige food square. He folded the wrapper and put it in his pocket. Without thinking, the small automatic tidiness of a man who has lived in small spaces and learned not to leave traces, he turned toward the gate. Then he stopped. He did not turn around all the way. He just turned his head slightly. She asked him, were you afraid when you woke up here surrounded by staff you did not know, in lockdown, on a station you had never been to before? He was still for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, I was uncertain for about 30 seconds. When I first came around, I looked at the ceiling and I listened and I assessed what I could from the sounds and the light and the smell of the room, and then I thought about my situation and I thought about what I had available to me, and I decided that if anything went wrong I would manage, she said. And if you could not have managed. He finally turned to look at her fully one last time. His face was tired and calm and old in the way that young people sometimes become old when they have seen too many things too quickly. He said, then something would have had to go very wrong. First, he meant it simply, not as a boast, not as a threat, just as a plain, quiet statement of fact, in the same way he might say the shuttle will land, or water is cold, or morning comes after night. It was just true, and he knew it was true, and he had known it for so long that it required no particular feeling around. I've nodded to her. Once he walked through the gate, the shuttle disengaged from the dock with a low vibration she felt in the floor, and then there was nothing in the bay but the smell of fuel and the recycled cold air and the sound of the ventilation system doing its quiet, constant work. Dr. Vesikin stood there for a moment. She looked at the closed gate. She looked at the data pad in her hands. She looked at the entry she had written deceptively enduring. She walked back through the station to her office. She sat down at her desk. She opened a new file. She titled it simply, Humans, What We Missed. She stared at the blinking cursor. She thought about the femur and the hands and the parallel liver system and the layered skull and the 4 dead outcome files she had read the night before and the name on the small metal tag that had come in on a carryboard at 0300, in the dark and quiet of a station that had assumed it was ready for anything. She thought about a 19-year-old boy deciding what he needed to become and letting that decision live in his body for the rest of his life. She thought about the word shaped, and then she started typing. She typed for a very long time, and every word she wrote was for the 14 who had come before Cole and the ones who would come after him, and the doctors who needed to know before they looked at a human patient and saw something simple. She wrote until the station lights shifted to night cycle. She wrote until her hands ached and she did not stop.